Yeah, I'd say go ahead.
Okay.
Well, let me give you a quick introduction, though.
Okay, sorry.
So, okay, Sandra Scafidi owns Practical Preservation, an organization in which she specializes in identification, documentation, and evaluation of historic resources. She has experience with working with nonprofits and municipal governments. So, take it away.
Well, thank you. I promise I am better with computers than this. But I just want to say thank you for allowing me to share some of my knowledge with you. I've had the chance to work on some grants, and I've been fairly successful over the years. Sometimes not, but I just thought I would share a couple of tips on how best to approach applying for grants. And of course, most of my skill set is in historic preservation, but hopefully you'll be able to transition these to other grants that you might try to apply for. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so knowing your need. Basically, what I want to get across is that you need to understand your project better than anyone else before you apply for a grant. No one's going to want to give you grant money if you don't understand the project yourself and you can't convey the importance of that project. So hopefully through these next few slides, we're going to uncover the deep meaning behind your projects and how to convey that to the grantors. But of course, I know you probably already know the project. So next slide, please. And I apologize in advance if I step on our other presenters' toes here, but part of the key of creating a great narrative is having the supporting documentation to go along with it. So if you need letters of supports, estimates, matching funds, start early. You need to get those asks in way ahead of time, because at least if you're in West Virginia, you're probably going to be asking a lot of the same people who are going to be applying or writing letters of support for multiple projects. So you want to get in there, make it easy for your supporters to express their support for the building or the project. You can even draft a letter of support that you give to the people that you're asking for letters, just to make it easy on them. And that way you can also focus on key elements you want them to highlight. You could also make a bulleted list, but do not give the same sample letter to each supporter, because they'll just copy and paste it, and then you'll have 3 of the exact same letters. So I wouldn't do that. But also make sure you're financially able to meet the funding match required. You might have to take time to go and ask for a loan or try to get additional funding from the community to make your match. So just make sure you have all the documents you need to support your narrative in advance. And then you're going to always want to reference these items in your narrative. Next slide, please. So by being willy-nilly, I mean, when you're going after a grant, try to choose which grant would give you the most success. Use a targeted strategy, not a scattershot approach. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of the funders' time. If you're applying for grants that don't apply with or don't align with your project. Also keep in mind, if you're new to this, grant opportunities, it's not a wish list. It's not a lottery dream scenario. That you need to show that you have a well thought out plan. So you can't just say, I really would like $1 million. And, I wish somebody would give you $1 million just for asking, but it's not going to happen like that. Next slide, please. So you need to see if there's a connection between your project and the potential funder. Not every grant is going to be the grant for you. But once you find one, read through the whole application. Even if you've applied before, always read through the application because they may have changed things. They may have asked for things in a different order. Just don't make assumptions. Also understand your audience. If applying for a SHPO development grant, for example, don't think you're going to get siding for, or don't think you're going to get funding for vinyl siding to replace historic clapboard. It's just not going to happen. So don't waste your time or the grantor's time. Also, SHPO, for example, has their program guidelines online, which outlines the expectations, the eligibility requirements, and conditions associated with their grant process. So read through them so you understand the contract you might be getting into if you're successful. And it also helps to understand what exactly they're looking for. Next slide, please. This is just an example I pulled off of the SHPO website again from their 5-year plan. It outlines SHPO priorities, and I know SHPO can speak better to this than I can, but it lists their goals and objectives, and everything's there right in black and white, so you know exactly what they want to accomplish in this 5-year time period. This is just a snippet of their existing plan. There's multiple documents. There's multiple areas and goals to accomplish. So I would say take a peek at that and make sure that that your project aligns with their goals. And then again, reiterate that in your narrative.
If I could just say something about these goals and objectives.
Yeah, please.
The applications that are most successful identify what objectives you're aligned with, and you include it in your application. So say if you're going to develop a workshop, which we do get grants for that. So in your application, you would put, how it aligns, which is 1.1, develop historic preservation themed programs such as workshops, conferences, day camps, and such. So just look at what the different goals and objectives are in our plan that actually align with what you're wanting to do, and actually put the goal and objective into your application itself. So that lets us know that you have really thought through the process. How does it align with what our goals and objectives are that we are required to follow? And so that speaks louder to us, when you include the actual goals and objectives of our plan into your application.
Thank you. Yeah, it also shows that you went the extra mile and you understand the organization you're applying to, and it just makes good sense. So thank you. Next slide, please. And again, if this is new to you, I would suggest writing an outline to identify your specific need. And once you determine the goals that you want to accomplish with this grant, be realistic. Don't ask for a $3 million match or funding if your project only costs $5,000 or $50,000. Also, make sure the grant that you're going after is appropriate for your project. You don't want to go after a DOH grant if you want to get funding to support agricultural activities, for instance. So you just got to be cognizant of that. You're always going to want to justify your goals and explain how to achieve them. And understand, again, how much money is appropriate to ask for. Don't be greedy. Only ask for what you can justify. The grantors, I'm assuming, have read through numerous applications. So basically, they know how much a roof is going to cost. They know how much it's going to cost to repoint an area of brick. So don't try to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. Just ask for what you can truly justify. Also, you need to understand the consequences of accepting the grant funding. All awards have strings attached. Are you willing to abide by a covenant on your property? Are you willing to accept, or if you get a SHPO development grant, say, are you going to follow the Secretary of Interior standards? Can you apply, can you comply with the agreement if you do receive any necessary funding? And most grant applications show you what you're going to have to agree to before you apply. So read through that, because it just hurts when you spend all this time applying for a grant, you get the grant, and then the person who wanted the grant in the first place says, you know what, I really don't feel comfortable having a covenant on my building. And you're like, well, why did we apply for this then? So just keep that in mind early on before you actually apply. Next slide, please. This is a riff on that old adage, you know, you take one bite at a time. But basically, the key here is that projects are overwhelming, especially dealing with historic buildings, historic downtowns. I get it. And maybe completing a whole rehabilitation of, $4 million is too much. So can you break it down into smaller tasks? Perhaps fix the hole in the roof first, then make the building weathertight, then, just focus on items that decrease in necessity and importance. But only pursue funding for what you're able to accomplish. Because if you do get that grant for the roof and you complete it successfully and you do a great job, and then you go back maybe the following year or 2 years later and show that you successfully completed a grant, I think they're more apt to look favorably upon your application than if you asked for everything and then you couldn't move forward with everything. You just ran out of steam, you ran out of money. It's a big waste of time for everybody. So again, only try to accomplish what you think you can accomplish. Next slide. Developing a budget. So this is a hard part. This is hard for me too. And to be perfectly honest, I always tried my hardest to not I don't like to deal with fringe benefits and all that. It just drives me crazy. So I feel like one of my colleagues would be better equipped to answer those kind of questions. But for me, I just like simple, compelling narratives that work with your budget. You need to, I like to create a list of sources and uses, even if it's just really simple. You need to justify the expenses, provide evidence. And then what I like to do too is create a brief narrative for your budget and talk line by line about how the item that's listed in the budget applies to your larger project and your grant application. So your budget needs to directly correlate with your narrative. Next slide, please. And this super simple, just a quick table that basically just says your anticipated funds, the amount you're hoping to receive, and then what you're going to use it for. This is so simple. It's embarrassingly simple. So some grants might need a little bit more than this, but this is just a good start to get you thinking about basically what things are going to cost and where you're going to get money to pay for them. So, next slide, please. And again, this goes back to knowing your project. It's kind of like an elevator speech. Create a short synopsis of what is important in the grant. Excuse me, the summary needs to have a hook to, though. You want to entice the reader to know more. This is just a paragraph or two, but you're going to go into detail in the grant itself. Basically, I think what I like to try to do is you got to have a sexy hook to get people interested to read the rest of the grant. Because again, if they're getting 50 grants, you know, and it's just the same old, it's not going to be as compelling reading for the grantee if, I'm sorry, for the grantor. If you don't get them excited about your project, try to convey the excitement you have for the project to the grantor. Next slide, please. Of course, you need to be persuasive. You got to turn on that charm, but you have to use facts. You can't make things up and not, you know, support them with facts. So, but this is where you need to get the funder to understand why the project is special. Next slide, please. And another aspect of the narrative should be explaining to the grantor, you know, why they should care about your project. How is it different than any other building or community in the state or the region? If this is new to you, perhaps look at the National Register nomination and see if, you know, why was it originally listed in the National Register? Or explain why it's necessary to evaluate that resource for the National Register. Did something exciting happen there? Was it associated with someone or something special? You know, you're the expert on your community and your historic buildings. You just need to share what's special about it. And you can't assume that the reviewer knows anything about your project, even though it might be the, you know, it might be locally famous for you, but the reviewer might not be familiar with it. So you really need to share and express what makes your project special. Next slide, please. I'd also say you need to provide details what the funding will be used for. And again, I know this is kind of simplistic, but you need to emphasize the need. You can't just say, we need a new roof. You need to show why. Paint a picture with words, with high quality photos if you can, showing the damage that a hole is, you know, creating, or you know, explain the major problems that the resource is experiencing. If you know, the gutters failed and water's running down your brick building, you know, you need to get the gutter repaired and the brick repointed, or else you'll have a severe catastrophe. So emphasize what issues, well, will be addressed by this grant. If you're applying for like a transportation grant, and you have a city that has a dangerous section of roadway that people walk on and it really needs a sidewalk, talk about safety concerns, accident data, why so many people utilize this particular pathway. What's the socioeconomic makeup of the people that are walking, you know, if this is applicable. But just, you need to paint a picture of why your project is the best candidate to receive the grant funding. Next slide, please. You know, I like to also show how the grant funding will make a difference in your community. You know, discuss your expected results and the benefits from the grant award, how many people will be impacted, will it create a positive change for the community. If you think you have hard numbers to use to show how many people are going to be affected by this project, use that. You know, what kind of economic benefit will the community have? And there's just a lot of different avenues to explore to show how this one singular project will impact a larger area. Next slide, please. Again, most grant applications want to know how you're going to measure your success or progress. It could be as simple as once the hole in the roof is repaired, the building can be placed back into service again, or it'll create 5 new housing units, or you're going to reduce safety concerns. The grantors just, again, want to make sure that you understand the impact of them funding the project. Next slide, please. Again, this is taken right off the SHPO website, but make sure you answer all the questions outlined in the grant application. SHPO puts their evaluation criteria right online, so you know exactly what they're looking for. So again, if your project does not fit in, like for instance, if you have a historic building and you have a hole in its roof, it's not on the National Register and it's not in a historic district, you know, you're not going to want to apply for a development grant because it's not eligible for it. So don't, you know, it's just simple things like this by, you know, reading what exactly the grantee or the grantor is looking for, that will help your project move along and be more successful. Next slide, please. And this is just as simple as it sounds. Don't try to impress the grant agency with big words or fancy ideas. In my opinion, a grantor doesn't have time to wade through all the baloney to find the answers to their questions. They might be getting 50 applications to look through, and they're human. They get tired, they get grumpy, they get hungry. So you want to make it easy for the reviewer to find the answers to the questions that they're looking for. Just properly answer the questions they ask. I would say spell check, use good grammar. And I like to break complex ideas down to simple ones. I've read, you know, in some ways you need to show that you're the expert on this subject, but you're explaining the project to novices. So there's a fine line that you're walking between, you know, sharing the meat of the project, but also expressing to somebody who might not have any idea, you know, what a historic building's use is, or how to replace, why it's necessary to repair box gutters instead of putting on aluminum gutters or something simple like that. Next slide, please. Again, you want to show that your project is based on sound research and best practices, like the Secretary of Interior standards. Of course, there's always going to be some legwork involved, but if you can figure out the data, it'll more often than not provide a clear path to support your application. Also, proposals should be self-contained. Don't include links to websites. Instead, print out or PDF important resources to include in the document. Don't make your reviewer go looking for information, because it's just, it takes time and they might not do it, and then they might not understand the value of your project. So, so I would say make it as easy as possible for your reviewer. Next slide, please. Again, you're only going to want to ask for funding for projects that can be achieved with available resources. If you can justify $1 million ask, make sure that the funder allows grants that high, or that they have available funds, or that the items that you're requesting funding for are allowable expenses. And again, in SHPO's case, they list available activities online, and they don't have $1 million to give out to any one project. So next slide, please. So this is the simplest and yet most overlooked task. After working on a project for so long, you're familiar with the grant application, and at least I overlook simple mistakes. So if possible, complete the grant application, put it aside for a couple days. Give your mind a break to decompress, then come back to it, carefully review it for errors. If you don't have that kind of time, sometimes I read the report backwards. So I'll start at the bottom and read sentence by sentence toward the front or the beginning of the grant. It tricks your mind into seeing phrasing in a new way, and sometimes you can catch grammatical errors there as well. Next slide, please. Again, I'm repeating myself, but make sure you're following the grant instructions. Word count, format, double check that the font size is correct, that your margins are accurate. You don't want to spend weeks on an application and then find out it's been disqualified because you used 12-point Times New Roman instead of 10-point Arial, which is sad, but can happen. Next slide, please. Again, proofread numerous times. Next slide, please. Again, simple language is important. Don't use acronyms. The reviewer might not understand them. Sometimes reviewers come from different walks of life outside of your particular area of expertise. So just simple, clear language. Next slide, please. If you have time, it's always important to gain new perspective and insight by asking someone else to review your application. You don't want someone to tell you that it's great and you're fantastic and it's the best thing they ever read, because if it's not true, that doesn't help you. You need somebody to critically review it, both for grammar and editing, and to make sure that you meet the requirements of each task in the grant application. Next slide, please. And can you tell how important this is to me? I've learned from my mistakes, but this is so important. So just keep proofreading. Okay, next slide. Submit on time. This, again, simple but important. Unfortunately, 5:01 is not the same as 5 o'clock. So make sure that you submit your application on time in the manner that they requested. If they want it sent via the U.S. Postal Service, you got to send it via Postal Service. Don't think that you could send it by an email and then they'll print it out for you, because they won't. So submit on time. Next slide, please. So once you submit, then you have to wait. And if you're successful, congratulations. Now you got to make sure you follow all the rules that were outlined in the original grant application. But if you're not successful, take a minute to decompress, let the emotion go, because I know that you get emotionally invested in these applications. But then I'd suggest contact the funder or the grantor and ask what you could have done differently to have improved your grant application. Sometimes it's just nothing. It was great, but somebody else had a more compelling application, or there were just too many good applications. But I think it's nice if they're willing to ask the funder to see what you could do differently. Any information you get from the grantor is a gift. Be nice to them, thank them for their information, and then try again the next grant round. Using that tidbit of information. Next slide, please. So in the end, I would just say, just do your best. You're not going to win every grant you go after, but with practice, you'll gain confidence in the skill to understand what each individual reviewer is looking for, and to how to more quickly prepare your applications. So thank you. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Sandra. That's great.
Well, you're welcome.
I would add one other thing as far as the application goes.
Yeah.
In your narratives, where your narrative is supposed to be, do not put C attached, because that gets lost in translation. If we have to go search for what you have attached, then it becomes kind of one that's set aside. So please don't see attached. If you can't get it all in there, you can put it on the continuation page. But don't make me or the reviewers try to figure out where your attachments are. So please make sure that you put the narrative where the narrative is supposed to be.
Yeah, I should have said earlier, so my apologies, Sandra, but Sandra and Susie Salisbury, who's also going to be presenting, have reviewed for our office too. So they have firsthand experience with, looking at these grants, evaluating them against other grants. And so they've been the people behind the scenes making sure that these grants get the right grants get funded, because we do get so many. So they have that great experience. So
I think one of the questions too was, is there any path to have them reviewed ahead of time? I always offer that to grantees. If you go ahead and submit the grant, I'd be glad to look it over and send you suggestions on what you need, what would be beneficial to change in the grant. I reviewed one just yesterday, and her pictures were thumbnail size and could not even tell what they were. So, I sent it back to her and said, blow up your pictures and attach them to the grant again and then resubmit. So that option is always available.
That's great. And I would just add to that, Christy, and say, don't send it the day before and ask for a quick review. Definitely give some time, to accommodate your schedule, because again, you're doing a generous, you're making a generous effort for somebody. So they need to take into account your time and effort that you're putting into it as well. So
I think we've all had problems with this presenting today, but for those of you who don't know, I'm Christy Moore, the grants coordinator for SHPO, and I'm going to give you some application recommendations that will help you in presenting your grant. All right, so I'm going to include items to, let me shut my door. Sorry. I'm going to include items to include and exclude, and a lot of these, almost all of them, come from other grants, especially the not to exclude or to exclude from your application. So always, as part of your application, you'll list the property as it's listed on the National Register, but do not include the full National Register document. All we need is the name of the property as it's listed, and that is it as far as the National Register piece of it. And then Sandra talked about letters of support. Make sure that these are current letters of support. You can get them from your mayor, local property owners, or businesses. Your state representative will normally write a letter of support for you. And do not include letters from your family. That was comes from an application where that was their letters of support, was from their family. It was a family business, so but they didn't go outside the family business to get recommendations or letters of support from people who are in the community as well. The bank statement needs to show that you can pay 100% of the cost up front, as reimbursement comes after the contractor or consultant is paid. Now, you do not have to have 100% of the cost of your project up front, but you do have to have, by the end of your project, you would have to, you will have provided 100%. But then normally projects are split by 3 pays. And so the first pay might be for the down payment. And once you pay the contractor and get the cancel check back from the bank, you can go ahead and submit to me for the 50% reimbursement for for contracting work, or 70% if you're CLG as reimbursement on our survey and planning grants. Okay. Color pictures, I cannot emphasize this enough. We have received black and white pictures and they do not convey at all what the property, what the issue is with your property, what it is that you want to repair or replace. So color pictures big enough to where we can see what the issue is. So if I use a roof placement for an example. You do want to include pictures of the exterior of the roof, but you also want to include color pictures of the internal damages due to the water intrusion. The reason I say that is I received an application last March for a roof replacement, and all that was attached was a picture of the roof itself. So, of course, they didn't get the application because they didn't, my house might need a new roof, but unless I can show what the damages internally that are being caused due to the water intrusion, then your application is not going to receive a lot of merit. So be sure that you show the internal damages due to the water intrusion and label your pictures. So if it's a, west facing roof, be sure and label that it is that. If it's the inside trusses on, the west side of the roof that's damaged, be sure and label your pictures so that the readers can understand what part of the building that they're looking at. You also want to include, this is for the state development grants, you have to include a current, and I say within the last 2 months, estimate from a contractor to repair the roof. Sorry. With the survey and planning grant, you don't submit an estimate because it's a whole different animal. You're actually going to do an RFQ or an expression of interest to send out for them to bid on your project. So, then you also want to attach a copy of the deed, or if you're not the property owner, you do have to include a letter from the owner that they agree with what you're proposing, the work that you're proposing. This is very important because, sorry. Because if we receive an application and the deed says that the property owner is, Mr. X, but you're Mr. Y, and your name isn't on the deed at all. So that's where we would need letter, include the deed, but also include a letter that the owner agrees with what you're proposing. The budget page, which talked about, it should reflect the individual parts to be repaired and replaced, and also match the estimate as close as possible. What I mean is, sorry about that. Say you're going to request to have the roof replaced and windows replaced. So on the budget page, you would show what the cost of the roof would be, and you have to get an estimate from the contractor to that effect. So if the contractor amount is $50,000 on your budget page, the total would reflect, like 50% from the grant and 50% match, so that the total matches the amount that of the estimate that you received. And I think I have that in there twice. So that's pretty much the what you should include in your application to give it the best possibility of being approved by the review panel. I'm always available to answer your questions. And, we talked about reviewing the application prior to submission. We're always willing to do that for you. But then again, it has to come in, before the deadline. If it comes in at the deadline, there's a chance that it might not be able to review your application in time for the submission to our review panel. Some of you may know that there is I think one of the questions was, how long does it take from the time you submit your application to when it goes to the, until you are notified? So the applications are due March 31st, well, April 1st this year, because the 31st is on a Sunday. And then they go through our review. Like I have some of my coworkers in the office that will review some of the grants that, maybe, that would pertain to them, that they would have more awareness and knowledge of. And then it goes to the Archives and History Commission, which is our commission that approves the grants. And then they have the ability to approve or disapprove the grants. So the recommendations that comes from the independent review panel, goes to them. And then once the commission approves the grants, then it goes to the governor's office. So it's a multi-layer process of approval. And as far as the development grant, you would know by July 1st whether or not you received the grant. So you'd be notified if you did receive the grant. You would also be notified if you did not. So so if you do get a grant, know that it's gone through multiple layers of approval. And so that's pretty neat when the once it goes through the whole process. And so, and they have approved your grant, that it's gone through many layers of approval. So I think that's all that I have, unless anybody has any questions.
Well, we'll hold questions for the end.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
And so that way everybody can just ask general questions of all of our panelists. So next, Susie will talk about the review process. And Susie Salisbury is Vice President of the Charleston Area Alliance, which is an economic and community development organization. And she has over 40 years worth of experience in community development. So go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I had to go back. Thank you very much. And I will quickly go through this. Some of this you've already heard in the other two presenters. But as she mentioned, I have served on the review committee for a number of years. I also happen to be the president of a private foundation here in the Kanawha Valley area. So been on that for probably over 10 years. And so I've reviewed lots and lots of applications. You all can see my screen, right?
We can see we can't see it in presentation view, but we can see the presentation from a regular.
Okay, let's see if, all right, I'm probably going to have the same issue you all had.
I think it's fine if we just do it from
Okay.
Yeah, if you just kind of click through the slides, like.
Is that it?
There you
Yeah.
go. Yes, you have.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So I just want to cover a couple of topics. And again, you've already heard a couple of these, so I cannot reiterate more clear and concise. You know, serving on a selection committee and a grant review, which I really enjoy because number one, I get to learn a lot about projects going on across the state. But I can't reiterate more the clear and concise. We've been in these and we'll look at things and we're like, I don't really know what they're talking about here. So, you know, make it clear, and you're going to see in one of my other slides that, you know, have somebody that knows nothing about historic preservation or what you're working on, have them read your narrative before you submit it, because that's the best way to really get some good feedback. You've heard a little bit of this, mapping and photos. Just assume that the reviewers don't have any idea where this project is located. So be real clear on the maps. You know, here's exactly where it is. Here is, you know, if it's a cemetery, here's where the church is or used to be. You know, just name some of the things around it so we can get a good, clear idea of where you're talking about. Same thing with the photos. Make sure they're clear photos. We've received photos before, and it's like you can't really even tell what it is. And mark every photo. You know, this is a photo, you know, in the northeast corner of, you know, cemetery A or whatever, so that we're able to lay that out. We've also talked a little bit about budget. I mean, really just do the math and keep it simple. I agree with what Sandra said. I mean, I've managed many grants myself. When you start dealing with salaries and benefits and even volunteer hours, it just causes you so much more work than if you just had cash match, you know, from a partner in the project. Keep it simple, but triple check your numbers. Have somebody else check them. Make sure everything adds up. And read again the criteria for evaluation. As they said, Chapeau does a fabulous job of providing everything to you up front. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't understand how you're going to get points in each one of these categories, because they've given it to you already. They also provide to you a checklist. A lot of other grants will provide you with a checklist. And, you know, personally, when I'm doing a grant, I keep that, I tape it up onto the screen of my desk, which I'm going to be doing this afternoon. And I just start checking off everything. So make sure everything is in place and together for your checklist. I did put into the chat a link to the West Virginia Grant Resource Center. I did reach out to them and check with them, and they said yes. Historic preservation projects can be reviewed. They can provide technical assistance for those. There's a link on here. I think we're running out of time, so I won't go through it. But if you go to that link, take a look. You do have to make sure you read everything, but they do have an intake form. So if you know that you're going to be applying for a grant, say in June or July, go ahead and fill out that intake form and let them know a little bit about your project. And this, by the way, is funded by state and federal resources. So it's our taxpayers' dollars that are providing this service. And I really would love to see so much more of the state of West Virginia using this service because it is free, but you do have to do some work ahead of time. You kind of have to have your project in mind. You have to be able to reach out to them. Now, they're not going to fill the form out for you, but if you want to send them some of your grant narrative, let them read it, send them your budget, let them read it and make sure it all makes sense. Please use that resource. It is paid for. They will assign somebody to work with you. You know, take advantage of it. I wish I would have had this resource even 10 years ago. It's really great. But they're limited on the type of grants they can work. And so when I spoke to them, I said, historic preservation is economic development. So I think they work a lot on health and they work on economic development. And they said, you're right, that does fit in the economic development bucket. So they have approved assisting with preservation type projects. And when this is my last slide, again, I'm reiterating clear and concise. Put yourself in the reviewer's shoes. Take a look at your application and say, okay, if I'm sitting here reviewing 25 applications, what's going to make mine stand out? How can I make this application easy for the reviewer to go, oh goodness, everything is here, it's clean, numbers add up, check, check, check. Let's put them over here in the pile that we want to definitely consider for funding. And I'll reiterate again, have someone unrelated with the project read over your application. So those are my tips and tools for particularly with State Historic Preservation Office on, how to catch the reviewer's eye. And just remember, keep things very simple and make it easy for them to read. And that's it.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for our panelists? Feel free to unmute yourself or pop it in the chat.
Yeah, I was gonna say to maybe if Christy could or Susie or Sandra wants to discuss maybe some of the budgeting challenges that were noted in the comments. So, dealing with fringe benefits, non-material items, in-kind contributions. I don't know if anyone wants to hit on some of those.
Well, if you're talking about using salary and benefits for an in-kind match, benefits is not really a part of the in-kind, but the salary is. So if it's someone in your office that is going to be like help tearing off the roof before the contractors get there, what is their hourly rate? And that has to be approved ahead of time before the work begins. Same with anybody who is maybe not related or not working for you, but you have them come in and help, then it would be at minimum wage, which is $8.75, unless you can show that, this is their regular job. Then we could maybe determine a different amount. So, even with I guess that's where we're different, even with the survey and planning and the development grants, we only will allow salaries as a portion of the match. So you don't have to worry about benefits.
And Christy, if I can add too, for the newbies, keep in mind though that if the contractor comes back and says your project's going to cost $50,000, but you have a match of $25,000 from salaries, you're still not going to be able to pay the contractor. Like, he's not going to accept your salary as his payment. I mean, I'm saying this wrong, but you have to have the cash to pay for the whatever you're working on. If it's a development grant, say.
Right. You have to have the match, or you have to have enough to pay the contractor. So if it's a development grant, it's 50-50 match, you're reimbursed 50%. If you include in-kind as part of your match, then we include that in our reimbursement. So just, to make it easy for you, all you have to do is, if it's salary other than $8.75 an hour, that you present to us, if it's a resume or, vitae or anything like that, that you're requesting a rate different than that for the in-kind portion.
Mm-hmm.
Deal. Any other questions? I'm sure any of these wonderful panelists would also be glad to take questions afterwards, maybe, and so we can share information and really great resources shared. I think the Grant Resource Center is great to have, great tool. I think everyone should be using that if you can. I know sometimes it's like last minute, you're just trying to get your application in. But if you have the time and if you can kind of plan in advance, I mean, our grants are the same time every year. So hopefully you have some chance to kind of prepare and get some other eyes on it. So
Mhm. You can always call with questions, you know, I'm always available when it comes to your grant application. And I have great resources, you know, to, if I don't know the answer, that I can contact and Sandra or Susie and also my coworkers as well. So we have, you know, our resources or our brains or whatever, you know, are available to you. Our eyes are available to you, you know, to review in advance if you would like.
good deal.